Hello everybody, it's Joan and this is Joan's Kitchen, and today I'm going to be making nachos, and as a little bonus I'm also going to show you how to make guacamole and how to make tostadas. Nachos are a pretty popular snack food here in the US. A lot of times you'll have them in a stadium where you have tortilla chips and there's like a melty cheese sauce. It's actually just called nacho cheese, which is kind of a Velveeta type cheese that's melted with some spiciness in it, and that's poured over the warm tortilla chips, and then there's usually jalapenos, pickled jalapenos put on top, and it's a finger food that you eat in stadiums. And before I go any farther, I do want to say if anybody has any questions while I'm talking here, or if you're watching the replay, if you could put them in the comments, I will do my best to answer the questions for you. I started making nachos when I was living in Chicago back in the early 80s. We used to watch a lot of football on Sundays, and this was kind of a favorite snack that we had. And I jazzed them up a little bit. Personally, I think if you've been watching my cooking shows for a while, you know I'm not a fan of real spicy food, so the whole thing with the spicy cheese and the jalapenos never appealed to me. But I did like the whole idea of having nachos being kind of a substantial snack. And you'll see that this is something that you can really improvise. I'm going to show you how I've done it, but you could really use any kind of ingredients that you like. And as we go along, I'm going to talk about some of the things that you may want to substitute if you don't want to use what I'm doing. So the basis for nachos are tortilla chips, and we've used these a couple times before in my cooking programs. We used these in the very first one on Cinco de Mayo to make chilaquiles, which is kind of like a breakfast food that uses leftover tortilla chips. And what we're going to do is the tortilla chip is going to be the base for the nacho. And what I'm doing today, a couple weeks ago we made refried beans, so I made a batch of refried beans for making the nachos. I've got those here. And I'm introducing a new ingredient today, which is chorizo. Chorizo is a kind of a Mexican sausage, and it's a highly seasoned but not spicy sausage. In Mexico, it's pretty much always made out of pork. Here in the US, you can get it made out of beef, or you can even get soy chorizo. And it's seasoned, but it's not spicy. It has paprika in it, and paprika is a spice that does come from peppers, and it has garlic and onions. And when you get it in a tube like this, it's kind of like if you have ever made Italian sausage, where the Italian sausage comes in the casing, and you kind of squeeze the sausage out of the casing and put it in a pan and break it up while you're cooking it. That's what you do with the chorizo. So I've already gone ahead and pre-cooked some chorizo that I'm going to be using in my nachos today. I also have some grated cheese, so I'm going to be assembling the nachos with putting a layer of beans on them, and then a layer of the chorizo, and then some cheese. And I'm going to go ahead and put them into my little air fryer here to heat them up and get the cheese melted. While that's going, I'm going to go ahead and show you how to make guacamole, which is a very simple thing to make. And guacamole is another one of those dishes that you can add in pretty much whatever you like to suit your taste, but I'm going to show you how I do it. So let's get started here. I'm going to take a little tortilla chip, and I'm going to spread just a little bit of beans on the tortilla chip, and I'm going to take just like a little teaspoonful of the chorizo, and I'm going to sprinkle a little cheese on top of that. And I'm putting these in a little small bowl that I'll be able to put in the air fryer, a heat-safe bowl. I did a little research on nachos, and nachos were invented, we believe, around 1940 in the Mexican town. It's a border town that's called Piedras Negras, which means black stone or black rocks. And it's across the border from Eagle Pass, Texas. It's in the Mexican state of Coahuila. And the legend has it that there was a restaurant owner named Ignacio Anaya, and he had some American ladies who were regulars in his restaurant, and they went in there one day and they said, "Ignacio, make us something a little bit different for a snack or for an appetizer today." And he went back in the kitchen and saw that there was a fresh set of fried tortilla chips, which are also called totopos, by the way. And so he warmed up the tortilla chips and melted some cheese over them and served them with some jalapenos on the side. And the ladies really liked them a lot, and that became a regular item on his menu. Now, how do we get from Ignacio to Nacho? In Spanish, there are many first names that have a nickname that's kind of a derivative of the name, and Nacho is the nickname for Ignacio. And I know this firsthand. My Aunt Rachel was married to a man named Ignacio, who was my Uncle Nacho. And I still have cousins in the Mexico City area who watch these from time to time. So if any of my cousins are watching, it's interesting to know that this dish has the same name as their late father. So I'm going to go ahead and put these nachos here in my air fryer to cook while I'm making the guacamole.
What kind of cheese are you using?
Today I'm using a mixture of Swiss cheese, but you could really use any kind of cheese. Traditionally it would be made with a Mexican cheese. It's kind of a melty cheese. You could also use mozzarella cheese, Monterey Jack, pepper jack if you wanted to be a little bit spicier. You could use cheddar. You could use a blend of like cheddar jack or Colby. I mean, really anything that you want. The Mexican kinds of cheese that you would probably use would be something like cotija cheese, or maybe queso panera, I think it's called. It's a melted cheese that you use in guacamole, or in enchiladas. So I have my avocados here. These are small, ripe avocados. These are Haas-style avocados, and they're my favorite. As you can see, the skin when they're ripe is almost like a black color, and it's very smooth. It doesn't have like lumps all over it. And in my opinion, these avocados have the most flavor. A couple weeks ago, we talked about mole, and mole was an indigenous word that meant sauce, and actually it applies to guacamole. When you think about guacamole, the last part of the guacamole is mole. So I've cut my I've cut my avocado in half. I cut that half in quarters, and now with the pit on the other side, I'm just pulling this off of there. This has mostly come off clean, and I'm just going to put these two avocados that I'm cutting up into a little bowl. My guacamole is very simple. I personally don't care for cilantro, so I never put cilantro in there. I typically just put in garlic powder and salt and a little bit of prepared salsa. From time to time, if I'm in the mood, I might put some fine chopped red onion in there. I like the way that tastes. The guacamole is just a dish that pretty much everybody loves. So I always like, when I'm having people over and making guacamole, to make a big batch of it, because it seems like when you order it in a restaurant, it goes pretty quickly, and I just think it's kind of a nice, hospitable thing to have a big bowl of guacamole, because it is a dish that seems to be so well loved by everybody. What I'm using the guacamole here for today is going to be to garnish the nachos when they come out of the oven with the cheese melted, so I'll be putting some guacamole on top of them. And I'm also going to be using them as an ingredient on the tostadas that I'm going to be making. So I've almost got these all peeled, and you can see I'm putting them in a little bowl. I've got a fork in the bowl there, and I'm going to turn around and wash my hands real quick. Just because I don't particularly care for the feeling of the raw avocado on my fingers. So I'm going to take the fork that I've got here and just mash up the avocado with a fork. The avocados have to be pretty ripe for you to be able to do this. If they're not ripe, it's going to be almost like, I would say, like a woody texture. And it's really important to have the avocados be ripe when you're making the guacamole. Otherwise, it's not going to have the full flavor of the avocado, and it's going to be kind of hard to deal with as far as mashing it. So I like to just mash it with a fork. The other alternative is to take a knife and kind of cut it up into chunks that way. I like my guacamole to be pretty chunky. So it's not going to be like a real smooth thing. There's still going to be some discernible pieces of avocado in there. So then I'm just going to add a little bit of salt. And the salt is really to taste. And then I'm going to add some garlic powder. So in this case, for 2 small avocados, I probably added about half a teaspoon of garlic powder and maybe a quarter to a half a teaspoon of salt. And then the last thing that I'm going to add in is some prepared salsa. This is a brand called Paste Salsa. This is not a spicy salsa, and one of the reasons that I enjoy putting salsa in guacamole is that there's citric acid in here, and that helps to preserve the color of the avocado so it doesn't get like a brown or black color on the top. It's not very spicy. Again, depending on your spice tolerance, you could add more or less. And when you're making guacamole, you always want to taste it for seasoning to see if you have enough salt and garlic powder in there. I'm going to grab a little tasting spoon here and see how it is. And it's good. It needs a tad bit more salt. So I'm going to give it like one or two more grinds of salt and mix that up, and that is going to be ready to go. The first mention of nachos in a cookbook was in 1950. There was a cookbook that was published called A Taste of Texas, and nachos was a recipe that was listed in there. And then the kind of nachos that we're mostly familiar with now, like the ballpark nachos, were first introduced by a concessionaire at Arlington Stadium where the Texas Rangers play, and that was in 1975. And my nachos here are ready. I love using the air fryer as a device to heat things up quickly. It really works well in that regard. Put this on here because it's hot. So I've got my nachos here, so you can see I've got the beans that I spread on there and a little bit of chorizo, and the cheese is melted. And now I'm just going to top this with a little dollop of guacamole and a little bit of salsa. And I'm going to top that with a little dollop of some sour cream. I mentioned that you can use different things. If the idea of using chorizo doesn't appeal to you, you could always use taco meat, or you don't have to have any meat at all. You could also use shredded chicken. You know, it's really up to you, whatever you want to do to make this. And the things that you use to make the nachos are also pretty much what you use to make tostadas, and I'm going to show you that in just a second here. Take this off of here. I'm going to make a couple of these with salsa and a couple of them without salsa. And then just like a little squirt of the sour cream on top. So there are our nachos. Now tostadas are basically whole corn tortillas that have been deep fried, and they're in a flat shape. And so I've got a bag of these. You can usually buy these prepared at the store. One of the things about buying them is that a lot of times they're broken when you get them. So I'm going to dig through this bag and see if I can maybe find one that's intact. Okay, here's a whole one. So tostadas are something that are a staple in Mexican restaurants, and they're usually made out of corn tortillas. Sometimes they're made out of deep fried flour tortillas, but it's something that has to be crispy because it's going to be standing up to a lot of the ingredients. So it's kind of similar. You're going to start out by having a layer of beans on your tostada. And again, you can have meat or you don't have to have meat. I am going to put some of the chorizo on this particular tostada. The order that you're going to be layering the food on here is going to be a little bit different. This is the same, putting the meat right on top of the beans. But then what I'm going to do is put some lettuce on top of here. So this is shredded lettuce. I just took a regular head of iceberg lettuce and cut it lengthwise in thin strips and then cut it across to get the shredding on there. I have a little bit of chopped onion here that I'm putting on top. And I'm going to put some cheese on top of that. And then I'm going to put a little dollop of the guacamole on top of there. And then the salsa would be to taste. So here's the tostada, and this is typically eaten like this. You just raise it up to your mouth and take bites out of it. A lot of times they'll get kind of crumbly and fall apart, so you might end up taking up pieces of it and eating it that way. But that is pretty much the lesson for today. I do want to say that one of the things that's nice about tostadas, and you can do this with tacos too, is if you're entertaining a lot of people, you can set up kind of a buffet and have a lot of toppings for the tostadas and have people do them on their own. This is something that my sister and brother-in-law do frequently. They'll have like a tostada party and have all the fixings. And it's a nice way to do it because anybody that has any food that they don't like, or maybe they don't eat meat, they can create it however they want to. One of my favorite things to put on them is carnitas, which is kind of like a piece of pork that's simmered for a long time in spices and then shredded. It's kind of like a pulled pork, but the seasoning is very different. Oh, and speaking of seasonings, I did want to talk about a little bit about the garlic powder again. I saw an article earlier this week. Garlic powder is not a substitute for fresh garlic, but the article was talking about how garlic powder is appreciated as an ingredient in its own right in Latino kitchens. in Mexico and Puerto Rico and Central America and also in the Caribbean. And this is a staple that I always have in my kitchen. My mom always cooked with it, and I just like having it around. It has a very different flavor than fresh garlic, but it really does add to what I'm cooking. For what I've made today, I put garlic powder in the beans when I was cooking them, and then I also put a little bit of garlic powder in the guacamole. So I want to check one more time to see if anybody might have any questions about what we did today. So we made some nachos and we made tostadas, and we did a quick demonstration of how to make guacamole. And here is my cameraman coming over for a sample.
As the camera person, my union contract says I'm entitled to free food. So I'm going by the union contract. Those are delish.
Good, I'm glad you like it.
Really good.
I'm glad you like it.
These would be great with my Dallas Cowboys.
Well, it's from the same part of the country, pretty close. The one other thing I wanted to mention is that I think in the U.S. a lot of times we have the mistaken notion that all Mexican food is spicy, and that's really not true. Even though peppers are indigenous to the area, and peppers come in all different heat levels, from no heat, like in sweet red peppers, to incendiary, like habanero or Scotch bonnet or ghost peppers, which are all the same thing, by the way. Mexican food does not have to be spicy. And I have a very low tolerance for spices, but there's so many varieties of Mexican food that are not spicy, and this is one of them. If spiciness is your thing, you can always amp up the heat level by adding jalapenos on here, or pickled habaneros, or I'm blanking on the name, the smoked jalapenos. But you can amp it up by adding other seasonings to it, or you may want to add a few drops of Tabasco sauce or Cholula sauce or something like that into your guacamole if you're really into having very spicy foods.
Can the nachos be heated in the oven?
Absolutely, nachos can be heated in the oven. I mean, I used the air fryer today just because I was making a small number of them and I wanted to do it quickly. But when I would make them in the past, I would actually have a cookie sheet and line up my tortilla chips on the cookie sheet and either heat them or even run them under the broiler, which is kind of a fast way to do it. You just want to be careful not to burn it. But that's the way that you would do a lot of them at once. And even when they're standing like this, the tortilla chips are crisp enough that they really don't get soggy, and they really do taste good at room temperature. So do I have any more questions before signing off for today? Well, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Joan's Kitchen, making nachos and tostadas and guacamole, kind of a 3-4, and I will see you again next week on Monday. Thanks for watching.